and this is your cortex here. How might it know when to secrete hormones? Going back to our premise that it's all about communication, what's a really straightforward answer that can explain how does the adrenal cortex know when to secrete hormones? Because there's another hormone that tells it to secrete hormones. Okay, so this guy is secreting hormones. I'll draw these in brown. I'll call these cortisol. This is your stress hormone. And we're wondering, how does it know when to secrete cortisol? Well, it's not pre-programmed. Perhaps there's another hormone. Okay. So you start looking, and you say, okay, so there's a hormone that might tell the adrenal cortex to secrete cortisol. By the way, for those of you who are pre-med and who are thinking about, who are learning about these things and maybe sending to the MCAT, one way of thinking about this is the MCAT will tell you to study like top-down, just logically, the way we know it. This way of thinking is bottom-up. We're starting down at the level of the organ and asking questions, building the knowledge up, asking questions as we go. I think this is a much more fun way to approach the topic rather than just memorizing like the chain going down from the top to bottom. Okay, so that's just kind of introducing my approach here. So ACTH, this is called cortisol. ACTH, we're going to give it this name, ACTH, because ACTH stands for adrenocorticotropic hormone. Tropic just means, a tropic hormone is just a hormone that tells another organ to secrete hormones. Just kind of a fancy term. Okay, so we find this ACTH hormone that tells the adrenal cortex to secrete cortisol. Okay, where does this hormone come from? It comes from, so we're looking through the blood, and we're trying to figure out where this ACTH comes from. And this comes from, okay. See if I can draw this right. Very scary moment for me. Okay, I just drew this. Okay, don't confuse this with another organ, which I will name partly out of decency, partly because Amy, who will be teaching the next hour, is going to talk a lot more about other things. Okay. So we trace this ACTH all the way back to this hormone, to this organ called the pituitary. Okay. And where does it sit? It sits right below your brain. Okay. Things just got a little bit more interesting because now suddenly this is your brain. Okay, great. So suddenly we just got a lot closer to the brain. Great. Right. Okay, so you have the ACTH secreted from the pituitary, and it's telling your adrenal cortex to secrete stress hormones. Okay, next question. What's the next question?
Who tells the pituitary?
Yay! Who tells the pituitary? Okay, at this point, again, this is mentioned in the Zebra's book. This is going to be a big step in the way people thought about this field. People were really reluctant to think that the brain had anything to do with all this hormone business. Really, hormones were thought of as like this bodily thing, and we really wanted to keep our brain this thing, this beautiful, elegant organ that's responsible for our essence of our personalities and the true nature of our inner selves. But okay, here we are asking the question: how does the pituitary know when to secrete ACTH? So let's look at the anatomy of the pituitary. It comes in, there's two sides, as you can see. This is the anterior pituitary, and this is the posterior pituitary. The anterior is kind of like in front in that drawing. Okay, so you look at the anatomy, and you find, first of all, that ACTH is secreted by the anterior pituitary, and you see that there are actually these little blood vessels that I'm drawing here that link up to the brain in the anterior pituitary. This is actually not true for the posterior pituitary, but we're talking about the anterior pituitary. And these vessels link up to a part of the brain called the hypothalamus. Okay, I'm just going to call this H. Maybe H is something else. I'll just write it out. Hypothalamus. I'll just write hypo. Okay, so certainly you have the hypothalamus, connected to the anterior pituitary of the bloodstream. And now begins this mad scientific history to actually find a hormone that would be secreted down this bloodstream into the anterior pituitary. And this took like 14 years. And the way people did this is crazy. They actually got like thousands, I don't know, maybe even hundreds of thousands of brains from slaughterhouses, and they mushed them up and looked at what was inside. Because you have this is such a small like portal system that you have very small amounts of hormones having an effect. And so you need a lot of tissue to be able to purify stuff and maybe identify the hormone. But you'll read more about that in the disease. Okay. And what they found was, indeed, you have a hormone secreted by the hypothalamus into the portal system, and this hormone is called CRH. This stands for corticotropin releasing hormone. Okay, so we have the adrenal cortex secreting cortisol. You have the anterior pituitary secreting corticotropic hormone, and then you have the hypothalamus, which is here, secreting corticotropic releasing hormone. These releasing hormones are hormones secreted by the hypothalamus. There's a whole bunch of them that tell the pituitary to secrete tropic hormones. Okay, great. I'm not going to cover all the other systems, all the other hormone systems, but they're basically the same kind of axis. Here is called the HPA axis, hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis. This axis holds true for a whole lot of other organs. The one that we studied in high school was the sex hormones, and having the hypothalamus talk to your pituitary, talk to your testes, your ovaries to secrete certain hormones. Okay, great. So out of this picture, it emerges the idea that your brain is this master regulator of your hormones. The hypothalamus, part of your brain. Now that we've linked this whole axis to the brain, we're able to link stuff like what we think about, what we see, what we hear, what we think about, dream about, is now linked to our hormone circulation, right? Because the hypothalamus is talking to all the other parts of your brain, and suddenly you're able to, this is going back to Sapolsky talking about, you can start thinking about some really morbid image of yourself decaying, and you start getting stressed. What's that? Parts of your brain that are thinking about stuff are telling your hypothalamus, that are sharing these scary images with the hypothalamus. Your hypothalamus is secreting CRH into your pituitary, secretes ACTH, and ACTH goes to your adrenal cortex, and your adrenal cortex secretes cortisol. Great, we understand this picture. However, let's see where we're at now. Okay. So we really want to kind of sit back and not only rely on this image of the master regulator, because a really important concept of the class is going to be how do these hormones in turn go back and affect the brain. Now, one reason why people were reluctant to think that this could happen to begin with is because of this concept that I was confused about for a long time called the blood-brain barrier. There's this idea that there's a barrier around your brain to protect it from a lot of stuff that's circulating in the blood. This makes sense if you want to protect it from possible like microbes or bacteria stuff, other toxic waste from your body. You want to really protect your brain, so there's this blood-brain barrier. For the longest time, I didn't actually know what the blood-brain barrier even was. It turns out it's like cells, epithelial cells lining the blood vessels, protecting the rest of your brain. But you still need to have stuff going from your blood to your brain, or else your brain wouldn't be able to feed itself. So don't think about the brain as like inside of a shell that's protected from the blood system. It's not that simple. Okay, so now we're going to shift gears and talk about how the endocrine system can in turn affect the brain. Any questions on what we've talked about so far? All pretty good? Cool. Okay, what's the first reason why we would expect the brain to be able to know what's going on with hormones? Really simple, nothing too fancy. If I call the brain the master regulator, I need it to be able to regulate, right? So we don't have this image of the brain as like this mad king shouting out orders and not looking at what's going on, just shouting out crazy orders. Instead, you have a brain that is paying close attention to what's going on. He sends out orders, but he's listening to what's going on. This is a really important concept in biology known as feedback. In this case, what we're going to have is your brain, the pituitary, and your adrenal cortex here. So we already saw that from here to here you have CRH, from here to here you have ACTH, and from here to the rest of the body you have cortisol. Yeah. Good. Too small? Okay. I'll give it a second try. Well, I've just drawn this picture. Okay. So. And I'll draw my adrenal cortex right here. Okay. This is the adrenal cortex. There we go. So, really easy way for the negative feedback system to be put in place is that cortisol is secreted out into the body and actually can come back and talk to the pituitary. And also talk to the hypothalamus. Oh, this is so complicated. Okay, I'm putting a little minus sign here because this is negative feedback. All I mean by that is when cortisol reaches your pituitary or hypothalamus, it's telling it, chill out, bro, relax. I hear your message, I've secreted cortisol, but you're good. You don't need to keep on shooting out ACTH and CRH. That's basically negative feedback. It happens all the time. The product of a pathway will go back and turn that pathway off. Cool. But what this has opened the door to is the idea that these hormones actually are making their way into the brain. Very important concept. Because suddenly you have the potential for all these other hormones secreted in your brain, not just this negative feedback, but all these other hormones secreted in your body are able to make their way back up to the brain and have effects on the brain, its function, and eventually your behavior. What this is all about is, like, when we talked about first day of class, Professor Spolsky mentioned that there are cases in which, court cases in which a woman's menstrual cycle has been used as a way to not be charged with murder, where this idea that certain sex hormones were responsible for a change in her behavior, and so that was kind of a defense. Very important concept, kind of scary, kind of crazy. What are some other examples? Sometimes when you are having an inflammation response, you'll have this hormone called interleukin-1. You don't need to remember that name, but that hormone is telling other cells in your body that there's kind of an immune response going on and do whatever they're doing. But this interleukin-1 hormone is also going back up to your brain and telling your brain to be a little bit more sleepy and maybe a little bit more stressed out. And it activates these things like sleepiness in your brain, and that's kind of cool. Other examples of how hormones are going back into your body, into your brain, and affecting stuff there are, we've talked about vasopressin. Vasopressin, for anybody who's studying the MCAT like me, all you hear about vasopressin is that vasopressin is this thing that goes into your kidney tubules, whatever those are, and tells them to absorb more water so that your urine will be more concentrated and you'll be able to retain more water if you're like really thirsty and dehydrated. That's what vasopressin does. Okay, cool. Now you start talking about vasopressin going back up to your brain and making you more likely to be monogamous. I think that's a whole lot more interesting. And I think so this is supposed to be. Okay. What about dopamine? Dopamine is this neurotransmitter that we've already heard a little bit about, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard a lot about already. It's a reward pathway, very important in a lot of diseases, like depression maybe, and schizophrenia and stuff like that. It's also a hormone that inhibits your release of